mention that they've increased rates by 2% each year. How do you quantify that?
Well, if you look back over the last 20 years and look at the time when the four wellbeings have been in the legislation compared to when they haven't been, the Department of Internal Affairs has advised that the rates have increased on average 2% faster in years when that has been in the legislation rather than when it hasn't been. And so effectively what it sends is it widens the scope of what local government should be focused on around the social, economic, cultural well-beings, environmental well-beings, and effectively it increases the scope of what councils should be focused on rather than those core basics of fixing the roads, fixing the pipes, delivering local services effectively and efficiently, and it increases the scope, and therefore councillors vote to increase what their council is doing, which costs more money for ratepayers.
Is that correlation or causation?
Well, ultimately, if you look back over the last 20 years, that's exactly what ratepayers have seen. And if you look back when the last national government removed the full wellbeings, it was the same evidence that was presented at that time, which showed that when the full wellbeings were put in place by the Helen Clark government and the time period following that, we saw rates increase faster than the rate, on average 2% faster than the years preceding that.
You see those full wellbeings as directly responsible for that increase. It's not just other things happening at the same time.
Well, if you look, it's a long period of time now, which we've had the full wellbeings in and the full wellbeings out, and so that provides a long period of time to be able to compare the data and actually assess that. And so what we're effectively saying here is we're going to remove the full wellbeings, say to councils what they should be focused on is those core local services, and actually, you know, we see so many examples up and down the country where councils, you know, the convention centres and the hotels that they look at and all of these other things that they want to spend money on, and you look at the language, they use the full wellbeings to justify the decisions that they're making, and we're saying that party is over.
Do you think councils will now stop building the likes of convention centres or, you know, restoring town halls or whatever?
What I think they will do. What I think they will do by virtue of removing it is they'll actually focus on the basics that the ratepayer expects them to deliver on brilliantly, and we've seen it across a number of cities where we actually haven't, you know, they haven't delivered on the things that they should be doing. Fix the pipes, make sure the footpaths are maintained, get rid of the graffiti, do the basics really well, collect the rubbish.
What you announced today, will that meaningfully lower rates across the country, do you think?
Well, it sends a very clear message to councillors about what they should be focused on and what they shouldn't be focused on by changing the purpose of the Act. The purpose of the Act under the last government was widened. We are reducing the scope of what local government should be focused on back to the basics so that they can stop the wasteful expenditure that we've been seeing.
It's messaging above, you know, actual rules for councils.
Well, it's actually changing the law. It's changing the law as to what the mandate and what local government is meant to be focused on. And the reality is, if you look at all of this, many of the decisions being made and how the full wellbeings have been used to justify all sorts of expenditure, we're removing that from the legislation.
To the rates cap policy or rates pegging policy yet? I mean, you talked about it earlier in the year, the local government New Zealand. Why isn't it not part of this package yet?
Well, as I said, there's two phases. This is the phase one. Phase two will be cabinet decisions in February. And ultimately, as I said to Jason earlier, there's some work that we just need to work through in regards to how those decisions will effectively be made, and it'll come into one piece of legislation which will include these decisions and those ones in the middle of next year.
Complicated, or is there sort of disagreement about how it should go?
Well, it is a complex issue, but what we're very committed to is having a rates pegging system which says how we want councils to be looking at their expenditure over a long period of time and keeping downward pressure on those rates.
Sorry, can I go to Joe? Just Joe at the back.
On the face of it, it seems as if you're trying to create more transparency here. Is the result you're looking for councils and or councillors to basically be shown up? Like when it comes to the next election, is it going to be obvious what councils and or councillors are doing or not doing that voters can make decisions based on?
Well, it will drive more transparency. A lot of this information, this will be bringing a lot of information together into one place and allowing ratepayers to be able to compare their council directly with other councils. And if you go to many other countries or other states in Australia, that's what they can do, and they can have that direct comparison which allows them to make decisions about who they vote for at the local elections.
But Joe, sorry, we are right. We want to benchmark councils. We want to make it very transparent about their relative financial performance and management, as well as obviously their delivery outcomes. We'll start with publicly available information in the first half of this year with the first go. Obviously, with more legislation coming through the package that we're talking about, we'd like to expand that even further into some more delivery pieces.
It may well be, though, that there are some councils and ratepayers that still want to have some of that nice-to-have stuff, right? So it might be that you end up with some ratepayers saying, well, actually, I do want the upgrade of the town hall, I do want the convention centre or whatever, because they don't align with the direction of travel that the government is putting down. Do you expect some pushback around that?
Well, I think ultimately people will make their minds, have their say at the election next year. What we're doing is reforming the purpose of the Act as to what councils should be focused on. And secondly, we're going to be, there will be a limitation in terms of the Act. Secondly, the transparency which will be provided here will give ratepayers much clearer information around the choices that they can make.
Does it limit people's choice as well, though, if the parameters for what's allowed to be done is lesser?
Well, the reform that we're making here is we're putting the Act back to what it was under the previous national government. Effectively, we're removing the full wellbeings, removing some of the changes that the last government put in place, and reducing the scope. Ultimately, at the same time, what's new here is having benchmarking reports so that voters can actually directly compare their council's performance with another council and be able to make up their mind as to whether or not their councillors or their mayor are actually performing adequately.
To the question I specifically asked, though, is it limiting ratepayers, voters' choice because you're dictating what the parameters
No,
of those
all we're doing
choices
is
are?
making it very transparent that we've been crystal clear this year that in the same way we've seen families and small businesses rein in their budgets and focus on what's important, you've seen central government go through that process and will continue to go through that process. We expect councils to do the same. Some councils are doing a great job, some councils are doing a terrible job, frankly. And as a consequence, we want to be very clear with them about actually what is important and actually to make all those financial, no one really brings the financials together to say, well, how efficiently are they managing their finances? How well are they using their balance sheets? How well are they using their debt profiles that they've got? Then equally, what's happening with respect to service delivery is the other piece that we need to get to. And I think making that transparent and making it very clear to councils, these are the basics that we expect you to do brilliantly, then that's up to individual voters and ratepayers to make the decision as does this council reflect what I want it to do. But by making that information transparent and available, I think that's a very good thing. But we have to get our councils focused on doing the basics really well. And at the moment, there's been massive amounts of distraction with pet projects and vanity projects from time to time in different towns and cities across New Zealand, and we want them to be very, very focused on what the ratepayer expects them to do, which is get a maximum value out of the rates that they're paying. It's no different, the same challenge we're going through in central government as you've observed in the last 12 months as well.
What are you doing there to refocus local government on basics? Is it the full wellbeing,
Well,
or is it something else?
No, that's about removing the full wellbeings. I mean, ultimately what you've got councils focusing on trying to do many of the same things that central government are doing, and actually local government should be focused on their core services and central government on theirs.
So like Wellington City Council does social housing, for instance, or council housing. Are you going to be trying to nudge them away from that further?
Well, I think if you talk to Honourable Chris Bishop, he's very focused on how we can expand community housing, and actually working to support that as a big part of the work that he's leading. But ultimately, councils across this country should be considering what are their core services that people pay their rates for, and how can they deliver those really exceptionally well without expanding their scope continually, which simply just puts up cost.
This is a question. Is council housing going to be scrapped under? Do you expect councils to scrap their housing initiatives under your plan?
Well, ultimately, councils make those decisions, but we've been very clear when it comes to what the full wellbeings and the focus that we want councils to be focused on. It's about doing the basics, fixing the roads, fixing the pipes, and making sure they do those services really well.
It may well be for some councils,
It's a choice for those councils, but ultimately, if a council, what we're focused on is actually expanding community housing. That's the work Chris Bishop's been doing.
But I'd just be really...
What is a basic and what isn't a basic,
Sorry?
and what's the point of this whole process? So you're taking out the full wellbeings to focus councils on the basics, but councils you've just said are going to decide what those basics are, rendering this whole process redundant?
No, because ultimately, as I said at the start, if you look at the advice that councillors and mayors get from their officials, the full wellbeings is used to justify extraordinary number of projects and initiatives at the local level, which quite frankly don't fit within the definition of the Local Government Act that we are amending the Act back to.
Do you think the social housing will fit within the amended Local Government Act?
Well, I'd say that if your council had a choice about whether to fix roads or build more social houses, they should be focused on fixing roads. Central government and the work that Chris Bishop has underway has a very good plan around social housing, and ultimately that is the role that central government is focused on.
Sleep on those fixed roads?
Sorry?
Where are the people in the social houses going to sleep?
Well, ultimately that is work that Chris Bishop is leading. He's the Minister for Housing. He has a very good plan and alongside Honourable Tama Potaka around social housing. If a council is thinking about its capital budget over the next 10 years and deciding should they be focused on building more social housing or actually fixing the roads that ratepayers pay for, I would suggest they should be focused on fixing the roads.
There will be councils that have legacy assets in social housing or in council housing. That's fine. They need to be well managed. But what I'd say to you going forward is we're expecting government to deliver social housing. That's their primary responsibility. And again, as Simeon says, when you've got limited choices with budgets and what you're going to do with the money and the rates that you've been raised, that wouldn't be the obvious place to go out and expand your position. You'd actually want to make sure that's a task that central government should take responsibility for and make sure we're doing stuff about that. So I'm just being really, we're just trying to say, yeah, there'll be history where people have acquired legacy council housing. That's fine. It's got to be tidily managed. But going forward, you wouldn't want to be saying councils putting huge amounts of extra money into social housing when the government is working incredibly hard to make sure we get the state house wait list down and get social housing and community housing providers with capital to be able to do more investment in a proper way.
How do you feel? The highest growth councils have the highest levels of debt generally because they're paying for growth. So from the metrics that you're gathering for ratepayers, how are ratepayers to judge whether the debt that's being incurred is being incurred for growth or otherwise?
Because it will be classified based on different activity classes, but also, as I point out, that is one metric. Ultimately, the LGFA has also agreed this year, with the support of the government, to support councils to be able to borrow more to invest in infrastructure, whether that's what we've done around local water done well or around high growth councils. So look, debt is a metric. But it's about what it's being spent on, and that's where that breakdown of what it's being spent on will be incredibly helpful.
So will it break down for ratepayers whether this is money is being
well, it's going into whether it's going to roads or it's going to water, whether that's going into building a nice big convention centre down the road. That's the type of breakdown it's going to include.
To go back to Joe's earlier
Could
point.
you name one other white elephant project in the convention centre that we hear a lot of?
Well, it's a very good one, isn't it?
Do you have any others?
But we've had councils in the past wanting to build hotels. That's not the core business that they're in. They're in the business of...
Any others beyond the...
Oh, look, I've seen the millions of dollars that Greater Wellington Regional Council like to spend on their bus stops with gardens on top. The list, there's plenty of examples. I think the Greater Wellington Leadership Group was looking at how they could improve healthy eating habits here in Wellington as well. I mean, this is sort of, it makes a mockery of local councils when actually they should be focused on fixing the pipes.
Sorry, I know for many of you might feel we're being a bit tough on the councils, but I'm just saying we're being very clear. We expect them to do the basics brilliantly and get back to the core job. Fix the water pipes in Wellington would be a good starting point. Make sure the roads and the footpaths are actually sealed properly. Make sure the rubbish gets collected. Get rid of the graffiti and clean the place up.
Anyone disagrees that councils have problems and we want the pipes fixed? But I mean,
right.
if you're citing all these white elephant projects, I thought maybe the list would be a little longer.
Well, we just gave you a few as it is, Thomas. We can go for a lot longer if you'd like. We want to make sure that councils also have a focus on outcomes, right? And I think they've lost focus. And they've lost focus in part, as Simeon has said, around the four well-beings. We saw that here in central government, where that was a huge loss of focus as well. And it's all lovely, but we've got to get back to the basics and choose consciously what is the must-do stuff versus the nice-to-do stuff. We'd all like to do and spend money in lots of different ways, in central government and in local government. But we are in a turnaround job, and when you're in a turnaround job, you've got to confront the brutal facts of the reality, whether you like it or not. And the reality says, do the basics first, and then we'll worry about the other stuff later. Sorry, mate, you have asked a question.
On the Wellington City Council's plans to stage a vote tomorrow on whether they are going to oppose the Treaty Principles Bill?
Well, I think, there's central government business and there's local government business, and many councils should be focused on maybe voting on how they can fix pipes would be my suggestion to them.
Okay.
What's the latest on the Crown Observer? Have you had any info back? Where are things at with Wellington on that?
Well, I first received my first report just over the weekend. Ultimately, they're going through their process around the putting out their annual plan, and the Observer's very much fully engaged in that process.
Anything to see in the report?
Well, it'll be released in due course.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
team. See you soon.